Okay, so our next speaker, Pippa King. I first met Pippa, I think, a couple of years ago. She was apparently at my Fractured Future presentation in Hull when I was doing the 63-date tour around the country in 2013, trying to raise awareness about this abomination that was about to be unleashed beneath the nation. And Pippa came to that presentation in Hull and then contacted me a little while later, or one of her colleagues contacted me to ask if I'd go back to Hull and give another presentation there. And so Pippa became one of the, and is one of the leading players in a group called Hey Frack Off. It's Hull and East York's Frack Off. And I have to say that, we'll talk about this a bit later and tomorrow maybe, but the group has been very successful in keeping rattling energy out of East Yorkshire for the time being. But Pippa's a lot deeper than just the anti-fracking community, because as I learned, Pippa's been on the forefront of countering the biometrics and RFID agenda, particularly in schools. And as you've seen from Brian's presentation, the establishment targets the youth, because they know damn well that, you know, we're not going to readily accept the microchip or wearing the microchip, even let alone having it implanted. But if you can introduce it in schools, then, you know, as they get older, it just becomes sort of part of their life. Well, Pippa has very successfully countered 2 attempts that I'm aware of to introduce active RFID chips being worn by kids in schools, on lanyards, around their necks, with active RFID right over the heart chakra. Amazing, isn't it? So Pippa really is the epitome of what one person, focused and tenacious, can really achieve. And she's also the absolute master of the freedom of information request. And you know, the freedom of information request, I'm going to talk about more about this, of course, as we go through the weekend as well, because it's a tool that is out there, and we certainly need to be using these tools. And Pippa has used them to tremendous effect. And what she's going to show you, and Brian talked about Scotland being the one-party police state. I've tended to be a little more tactful, trying to sort of introduce people to the concept, but in reality, that's what it is. And what you're going to see in Pippa's presentation is just how far advanced that police state surveillance agenda really is. And you know, this is going to be the theme, I think, that keeps recurring with some, you know, many of the speakers. You've got to know what you're dealing with to be able to counter it. And so, in my opinion, there's no better person to be speaking on this subject in the UK than Pippa King. So, Pippa.
Good morning. It's lovely to be here. Most people probably haven't heard of me. I've only been really talking about this biometric agenda for the past 2 years, though I've been on it since 2004, 2005. My kids at that point in time were 6 and 7 years old at a primary school, and I spotted a small fingerprint reader in the library, and I asked the head teacher, when are you going to ask my permission to take my kids' fingerprints? Because I'm not going to give it. You know, they're 6 and 7 years old. They don't need to give fingerprints in order to get a library book. And she calmly told me that she didn't need my permission to take my kids' fingerprints, at which point I was slightly gobsmacked at that. The reason why is because we have a Data Protection Act in the UK from 1988. If schools want to process sensitive personal data from children, which is these points here, ethnic origins, political opinions, religious beliefs, whether a member of a trade union, physical and mental health, they need a parent's permission to do that. And as you can see, biometric data is not on there. So she was entirely right, and she was well educated by the vendors that had sold her the biometric system. She knew where she was at with her rights legally, and as a parent, I had no rights to sort of challenge that. And I thought that was wrong. So from 2005 to 2012, myself and other parents and other privacy organisations like No to ID, Privacy International, Action on Rights for Children, not Action on Children, we tried to raise public awareness by getting articles in newspapers. We had article in The Times, The Guardian. We lobbied Parliament. The then Labour department who was in wouldn't listen to us at all. They just didn't want to talk to us about it. They said it's not up to us to, know where the biometric data is in schools. It's up to each school. But the Conservatives and Lib Dems did listen to us, and we were quite successful with them. They listened to us and they asked questions in Parliament. So I was doing that from sort of 2005 to 2012, and it's difficult when you have something like privacy and you hold that really dear to your heart. I was very private in it, and if any media inquiries came in, we had a list of, well, so-and-so will take this, and then if he's not there, so-and-so will take it, and I was like number 5, because I just didn't want to speak to anybody in the media. I just wanted to be private. And but I did start a blog in 2005 about the sort of journey that we went on, entitled Biometrics in Schools, and it's the only, as far as I know, internet site that just specifically deals with that topic. So when Ian asked me to do Humanity versus Insanity about 18 months ago, I had to really think, because I've kept my face off the internet. Obviously, I'm out there sort of with the different newspaper articles on my blog. But I should really come out and talk about it, because the other people, the other parents that I worked with since 2004 have all sort of dropped out and got back on with their normal lives. And I haven't. I've kept at it. So back in 2001, we had an information commissioner. We have an information commissioner's office that oversees the Data Protection Act and the Freedom of Information Act. And in 2001, they were approached by microlibrarian systems to see if they could sell this technology in schools. And the then information commissioner, who was a woman called Elizabeth France, said, yeah, I don't see a problem with that. It's not reaching the Act. So yes, you can go and sell it in schools. And so they started doing that. And then in 2002, we had a new information commissioner called Richard Thomas, who, I don't say disagreed with Elizabeth France, but found it concerning that she had allowed this. So we had some sympathy with the information commissioner's office about the practice of fingerprinting in schools. So what is a biometric? Well, biometric literally means life measure. And so there are sort of a number of types of different biometrics. There are physical biometrics where you have to physically go and put your fingerprint or your iris up to an iris scanner. So you're aware that your biometrics are being taken. And the primary biometrics that we used in schools were fingerprints. So all the computer does is it looks at the salient parts of the fingerprint, plots a little map, and then works out a digital algorithm for it. And the big thing about schools pushing this on parents and children was they kept saying, no, it's not a fingerprint that's been taken, it's just a digital number string. Well, it's a digital number string that's a life measure of the body. And in children, that if you're going to use biometrics, you need that sort of information needs to be secure for the next 30, 40 decades, because that is their identity. That's really an important part of it, and certainly not proportionate, I think, to getting a library book out when they're 6 and 7 years old. So going back to what happened with the school, I obviously put my head above the parapet and had, words with other mums in the playground, and they weren't happy about it. So I started writing letters to the government and the local authority, and David Cameron was then the Shadow Education Secretary, and he actually referred it to David Davis, who was in the Home Office. They hadn't heard of it as a Conservative Party. So we touched a few nerves, I think. The local authority actually got in touch with the school that my children were at, and I got labelled, obviously, a problem parent. I got sent to Coventry for about 3 months, and other teachers would speak to me. And it's quite emotive. I've had other parents get in touch with me and had the same sort of thing from the schools. This is a different type of biometrics that's used in schools. This was actually trialled in a school in Scotland. It's infrared palm scanning. They trialled this in a primary school. It was by a company called Fujitsu. So the infrared rays hit the veins, and it sends a pattern back to the scanner. And again, it plots the salient points of the veins and generates a digit. Iris scanning, again, it's measuring the salient points of your iris, And this was trialled in schools up in Newcastle in 2008. Though at that time the technology was relatively mature, and the lunch lines in the secondary schools it was being trialled on, they just slowed down rather than speeding up. So that's so good that that didn't work. Though now the technology has matured enough in the past sort of 8 years so that it can read iris scans from about 4 meters away, so you don't even need to go up to an iris scanner. In fact, there's a recent development where the police can actually read iris scans if they're following a car from the mirror and look at the driver's thing. That's how sophisticated the technology's got now since 2008. I mean, the obvious way around that is to wear contact lenses that don't give your iris scan away. So now we're moving on to a slightly different type of biometrics, which is facial recognition. And this is, I think, the most important biometric that we all need to be really aware of, because this can be taken without you knowing about it. And in some of the earlier trials in schools, children were going right up to scanners, and they were having the face scans for registration in the sixth form. But now it can happen from a number of meters away, and I wouldn't be surprised, from a half a kilometre even, with maybe even satellite technology. But we can certainly, this is certainly something moving into an area of biometrics where it's happening without us knowing about it. This is an artist who decided to make a mask that would foil a biometric system, facial biometric system, covering all the salient points of his face. I don't know whether I'd go that far as to wearing that, but if you see somebody with that on their face, they probably know something you don't about what's running behind any CCTV systems. And again, because the facial recognition is looking at the light and dark areas of your face and measuring that, you can sort of put them off by putting different face paints on and obscuring your face somewhat, so it would foil the system. Now we're getting into these voice biometrics, and this is what banks are now wanting to use to verify customers over the phone. And this is something that's happening in France at the moment and will be coming to a bank, I guess, in the next 2 or 3 years in England. Barclays are looking at it, MasterCard are looking at it. And it's not only sort of measuring your voice in the way that you talk, it's measuring your inflections, how you pause, the language you use. It's very intelligent biometric. This is a system that's used in an Israeli airport, which is gait biometrics, which measures how you walk, and looking at the different points of your body. So presumably this system, as was saying, sort of can recognize if you're walking suspiciously. But if I knew there was a biometric system like that in an airport, I would try and walk normally. And then wouldn't that make me look suspicious? I don't quite know how that system works, but again, it's very new. This was only from last year. But this is the sort of thing that's being honed at the moment. So we get into what we call soft biometrics, which is being used in Brisbane Airport, and this was only from earlier on this month. And soft biometrics are biometrics that don't recognize you necessarily by the measure of your body, but by what you're wearing, how your hair is, that sort of thing. And they're using these in cameras in Australia at the moment. We don't have anything like this as such in the UK yet, because it's relatively new. There's what we call cognitive biometrics. This is looking at the way that you type on a keyboard. So at the pressure of your strokes, again, looking at how you type with the pauses in it. You can see the music manuscript at the bottom to give an analogy of what they're looking at, what the system's looking at. And this is used by the American Department of Defense. So not only are employees sort of walking into a building, giving an iris scan, giving a palm scan fingerprint, but then re-verifying who sat at the computer by analyzing all what's so-called cognitive fingerprints. There's 2 other types of biometrics that are being developed at the moment. One is heart biometrics, and the other one is brain biometrics. We give off heart waves and we give off brain waves. And although commercially those aren't actually in the field at the moment, they're looking at recognizing brain waves for people in security vans. So if they get in the van, they can recognize it's whatever driver it is, but then they can analyze, is he too tired? Has he had a drink? What sort of cognitive state he's in? Really sophisticated biometrics. Same with the heart. You can wear, we've all probably heard of the sort of biometric health analyzers that you can wear around your wrist that analyzes your heartbeat, how you perspire, what your temperature is, that sort of thing. Again, that's all sort of worked in there. So those are the two. So there's a whole range of ways they can measure you. Problem with having these digital fingerprints is that it can get transferred between systems. And when we were campaigning against biometrics in schools, because this is Kim Cameron, who is Microsoft Identities Architect, or he was at the time, he's not actually now. The only people that thought it was a good idea to have biometric in schools was the government and the industry that was selling it. The developers, such as these people, were horrified because, again, they could recognize that if the children's biometrics or whole school's biometrics were compromised, we probably wouldn't know about it until 2 or 3 decades down the line. But also, they were then, 10 years ago, creating biometric fingerprint readers for entry to cars. I don't know if you've seen the adverts on the television, but you can start a car with a fingerprint for entry to houses, things like that. So they were sort of working on the basis that, well, actually, if you're going to introduce biometrics to a population and you're going to test it, shouldn't we be doing it on the older population so it has no impact on them if they're compromised? And there have been cases of school biometric databases being stolen, but with absolutely no consequence at all or concern from the police or the Information Commissioner's Office. They have no record of databases that have been stolen with children's biometrics on, but there have been some. So, the children that didn't, or the parents of the children that didn't want to be fingerprinted, got coerced and singled out. I had started this blog, and I had parents get in touch with me from all over the UK saying how horrified they were that this technology was being used in schools and what could they do. And I just said, you've got to say no. You know, if you don't want your child to have a fingerprint taken or a palm scan, just say no. And then they got told that in Leeds, in Morley High School, the kids that didn't conform to the fingerprint reader were made to eat their packed lunches outside in a shelter, even if it was raining. In Chester, the pupils got told they wouldn't be fed if they didn't give their fingerprints up. Children were made to go to the back of food queues. And again, one of the instances was a child that wanted to go and speak to its parent before it was fingerprinted, and the school told the child, oh, we spoke to your parent, it's okay, when they hadn't at all. So there were some pretty odd practices, really, desperate measures to try and get children fingerprinted. And I guess it's because if you're going to employ a system that's going to register people and verify who they are, in order for it to be efficient, you've got to have as near 100% take-up as possible. It wouldn't do to have 70% of the children on it and another 30% not. So schools didn't give children an option, or even tell the parents in a lot of cases that they were using this technology. And I mean, I teach piano for a living, and I can remember having a conversation about 5 years ago with a parent. You know, I'm going down to London, we're going to Parliament, and we're lobbying these MPs. And she said, well, I'd never let my child be fingerprinted. And this child was piped up in the background. I'd been fingerprint taken 3 years ago. Parent hit the roof. So we had some good access to the MPs in Parliament, and it was an interesting process because obviously the Labour government were in charge at the time, and they just took this view that, well, it's nothing to do with those schools or their own authority as long as they're not breaking the law. You know, we have no information about this, and, you know, you have to go to the schools if you've got a problem. But the Conservative and Liberal Democrat MPs, Nick Gibb, Greg Mulholland, Sarah Tether, people that we saw, were rightly concerned. And we got 36 written questions asked by opposition MPs to the Labour department. This is sort of 2006 to 2009-ish. And again, the same answer kept coming back, nothing to do with us, this is up to the schools. And so I'd taken the Mickey mercilessly out of Ed Balls, who was then in the Department of Education, and I was putting everything on my blog as a resource for parents to sort of have a look, newspaper articles, what the industry had said with raising their concerns. And in 2007, in July, we were pressing for some sort of regulation, at least a comment from the government to say that schools should at least contact parents to let them know that they're storing this sort of information about the children. And running up to July 2007, I thought, because I have a stat account on my blog, and I was getting hits from the Department of Education all the time, thinking, what's going on? And then the regulations came out in 2007, and they used my website as a resource, which was great, because there was nowhere else on the internet, really, to go to that had everything in one place. To draft up non-statutory regulations, which mean they weren't compulsory. They did advise schools to tell parents that they were taking fingerprints and palm scans, but they didn't have to. There was no consequence for them. So that wasn't good enough at all. I mean, in my mind, I wanted to change the Data Protection Act and get biometric information under sensitive part of the Act in Section 2. We had 2 debates in Parliament over it. We had 3 Downing Street petitions. Tom Watson was really useful with that, and we had an early day motion by Greg Mulholland. So after the 2010 election, we had a Conservative Lib Dem coalition, and to be fair to them, they drew up a Protection of Freedoms bill that became an Act of Parliament in 2012. And in Chapter 2, it's entitled The Protection of Biometric Information of Children in Schools. And it's the first law globally to address biometric technology with anybody under 18 in an educational environment, which is great. And it was a really interesting process advising the Protection of Freedoms Bill Committee and sort of watching the process of a law go through Parliament, go to the House of Lords, come back to the Commons, sort of flip-flop around like that. And it eventually got consent in May 2012. So it's really specific in the fact that each parent of the child needs to be notified. So if a school has got, say, 1,000 kids in it, it needs to get in touch with 2,000 parents, not just the parents that live with the child, but the parents that may not live with the child. One parent has to consent at least, but if the other parent doesn't agree, that non-agreement of the school processing a child's biometric data overrides the consent of the parent that agrees. And even if both parents agree, the child can object to the processing of their biometrics, and that overrides the parental consent. So it's weighted in favour of people not consenting, which I think is good. The one thing that did concern me a little bit was that consent can be given in the form of an email rather than a form of writing, which I don't particularly agree with. And, you know, in my opinion, the technology shouldn't be in schools anyway, but we compromised and got that, which was an achievement. So basically, from 2001 onwards, the biometric industry threw what it had at the UK school system. They tested biometrics for school lunch lines, cashless catering, library card systems, getting in and out of lockers, paying for school trips, access to areas and registration. They just threw fingerprinting, iris scanning, palm scanning, no voice biometrics particularly, though they were planned in 2007 for school children, and facial scanning. So one of the first things I did when my kids were nearly fingerprinted, I thought, I'll go and have a look and see what's happening in the States, because I bet they've got fingerprinting. And they hadn't got fingerprinting particularly. What they were doing over there, and they were just pioneering, was RFID in schools, so tagging children with RFID, active RFID frequencies. So right from 2005, that sort of technology being used in schools had been on my radar, so to speak. But, so yeah, this is basically what had happened. We're fingerprinting 4-year-old school children to get a library book out, using infrared palm scanners, iris scanning children, voice biometrics, and facial scanning. And the problem I had, really, as a parent, was that I wasn't using this technology, and even if I had a choice, I wouldn't use it. But yet, the school were in a position to sort of take over my role as a parent and tell my child it's okay to use it. This is a technology that isn't used in adult society for good reason, because we're wary of it. It identifies us. Fingerprints can put us in a criminal situation if we're not careful. So that, and it also sends, I think, a really potent message to a child that it's okay to give up your fingerprints if you want to have food, or you want to read a book, or you want to have access to areas, because that's a sort of underlying, I think, quite strong psychological message to send to a child, and it wasn't one that I wanted my children to think that it was okay to give up that level of data for mundane, basic human operations, especially in school, and me not having a say about it. That was wrong. And you know what, when the head teacher said to me, I can do this without your permission, I just saw red. I just thought, no, you can't do that, it's wrong. And I just got mad, and I just stayed mad for an awful long time. And a lot of other parents got mad as well. You know, there was a core of about 5 of us that were really motivated, and we had a lot of help from privacy organisations in London, and they sort of basically gave us the in to lobbying the MPs. I think as a group we wouldn't have had much of a chance if it wasn't for those organisations. But we managed to get that particular law passed, which was great. But in the USA, they were sort of a bit ahead of this. The biometrics had been in the USA since about 2004 to 2005, and different states had legislated about consent. So even though the UK Protection of Freedoms Act was the first globally national consent, some of the states in the US had already started and were on the ball. Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin had already said, you know, you need to get consent from parents. So we were saying to the MPs, look, they've done it in the States, can we not at least have that here, or have the technology thrown out because of the concerns of the developing industry? So I've been in touch with parents from the UK and the States to get this technology thrown out, really. I think as parents would like it to be, but we had to sort of compromise with at least consent so that people are aware. But again, consent is only consent if it's informed consent. So I thought that's why I thought, you know, my blog is really important, because if you just type in a biometric school fingerprint reader, my blog goes right to the top, because it's the only website, as far as I know, on the internet that's specifically dealing with that. And when I started it, I thought, you know what, nobody's going to search for this. It'll never catch on. And I was very wrong. But so starting something like that is a really powerful thing to do, because I had no idea that it would grow into the popular site that it is. Not that it's dead popular, but for this use it is. And you can have quite a powerful influence on helping people, really, just by starting basically what is an online diary. I kept it absolutely squeaky clean. I was up against a sort of multi-million, billion-pound industry as it is now, and you know, it's factual. I didn't rant. I just kept it. I mean, I did rant a bit at the government, I have to say, but they were up for that at the time. But it can be a powerful thing to do, because it sort of brings a community together. And you know, I've got some lifelong friends out of it now, especially in the States and in the UK. You know, we'd worked hard against on a topic that had never been sort of breached before, so it was good. So interestingly enough, it's happened in Australia. There was a school, I think in March, primary school in March, that was fingerprinting, or wanted to fingerprint all the children for registration. And they actually said to the parents, you've got no choice, it's compulsory, otherwise the kid can't get registered. So at the moment, I think the Green Party that is over there at the moment are sort of campaigning against that. But that's an ongoing sort of issue in Australia at the moment. So it's really interesting, because Saudi Arabia started fingerprinting children in their schools about a year ago. And they were really honest with why they wanted to do it. And they said it was a form of supervision. They wanted to install a sense of discipline, wanted to track children, and to make them respect regulations and gain better productivity. I thought, you know, well, at least they're honest. We just said it. The industry in the UK was saying, well, you know, it'll encourage kids to take library books out, it'll improve health and diet, it'll improve attendance. Like, how can a technology do that just because kids may think it's cool? And of course it didn't. There's no proof for that at all. All biometrics in schools does is verify and clearly identify a child. And there's 2 issues here. There's the issue of a school storing a child's biometrics securely for a long time, and then successfully not deleting the data but erasing it so it doesn't exist anymore. And the second issue is what information is stored against that biometric data. What does that biometric data tell you about the person whose life measure it is? So in the UK schools, they take height, they weigh you, they look at your diet through the biometric system that you're using. They look at your educational record, your attendance, and you can very easily build up a very accurate profile of one person traveling through a school system from the age of 3, 4 to 18 and 19. And in fact, increasingly as schools become more corporatized with academies, and especially in Glasgow, we have a company called AME that have taken out a 35-year Public Finance Initiative, PFI, to run the school system in Glasgow from about 10 years ago for 35 years. That's 35 years worth of data. AME are a massive multinational company that are into construction, defence, insurance. And now they're running the largest area of schools in Europe. And I just think, you know, there's a huge amount of data that can be found from children in schools. And in the US, they're sort of one step ahead with this. They've got a system in the US that they're bringing in called Common Core, which is sort of pushed by Bill Gates, which just sounds horrific. It's not yet, that sort of way of schooling hasn't yet reached the UK, but in the States, they make no bones. The big corporations that supply the software for the schooling system makes no bones about the fact that they're data mining the kids. They can look at what they've eaten, what time they wake up, what time they go to bed, how they get to school, and then from that data is input to the system. They can decide that, okay, on Tuesday mornings when you get up and eat a bacon butty, you can learn maths better at this time of the day. They can analyze it down to the smallest sort of detail, and then also what they do is they have facial recognition systems that obviously verify who you are, but they also track your eye movement, track the children's eye movement around the screens, and test what emotions they're seeing. So they can, again, look at how successful an education package is for an individual child based on how they react to the computer. Some good news happened last year. In May 2013, in Florida, 700 kids had their eyes scanned just to get on a school bus, and these were 11-year-olds. And the school district had forgotten to let the parents know this was happening, so the parents rightly kicked off. And there was a huge outcry in the press. And as a consequence, one of the senators, Dorothy Hook Hill, put a bill through court banning biometrics in school. So that went through the Senate and was passed in May last year, which is actually the first legislation anywhere in the world that's banned the use of biometrics with children under 18, which I'd have liked to have seen in the UK, but we didn't get that. But that happened in Florida. And as a consequence of that, there was a government body set up called SIBA, which is Security Identity Biometrics Association, and they were headed by a woman called Janet Kepp-Hart, who sat on the 9/11 Commission, and she is majorly pushing biometrics in the US at the moment at border control. And I think because this law got passed in May last year, SIBA was set up in March last year, they could see this bill traveling through the Florida Senate. And you could hear it in Washington saying, oh, what are we going to do, what are we going to do? You know, they're going to ban biometrics all over the country. And so SIBA set up and sort of mounted a massive, quite aggressive campaign to sort of bombard schools in the US with how good it is to have biometrics. It keeps children safe, it improves their eating habits, and all this lot. And she was all over Twitter, so I thought, I'll Twitter you back, missus, because you're wrong, it doesn't work. You're saying all these things. We've had this in the UK for, since 2001, and there is no evidence to suggest that what you're saying about biometrics is true. But they've considerably changed their tune now. I went to their website recently, and they've sort of changed it from, it used to say, schools, stop, help, you need biometrics. And now it says, now we need a discussion on biometrics. And I thought, yeah, you do, you're right. You've changed your tune, that's good. So in January 2014, Big Brother Watch decided to do a survey of how prolific biometrics were in UK schools. And they came to the conclusion that 40% of schools in the UK were using biometrics, which I disagree with, because in 2007, myself and another parent sent out a whole load of freedom of information requests, and we, at that point, thought there was 2,700,000 children using biometrics. So 7 years later, it in no way had increased by 500,000. But if you looked into the report a little bit more, actually, they only got 39% of schools responded to the Big Brother Watch Freedom of Information request. So they only took that data from 39% of schools. Now, if you were a school and you had a Freedom of Information request from an organisation called Big Brother Watch asking if you were fingerprinting your kids, I think I'd be inclined not to answer that, because when a school answers a Freedom of Information request, the answer they give is to the world. So whoever, the queryant who's asking the Freedom of Information request can basically broadcast that wherever they want. And it is still a contentious issue in schools using biometrics. So they had a very poor response rate and based their findings from less than 40%'s worth of schools answering. So what about the 61% of schools that didn't reply? When the Protection of Freedoms Bill, when the Act was going through Parliament, there was a committee of MPs that looked at the Act and discussed it, and you could put in papers so they could consider different parts of the Act. Well, myself and Terry Doughty put a paper together, and one thing the MPs wanted to know was how prolific the technology was in schools. And so I sent a Freedom of Information Act out to 500 schools, and I got a 47% response rate, which was poor. I couldn't give MPs data based on just a small percent response. So I decided to ring around one authority that hadn't responded very well. In Liverpool, my Freedom of Information request indicated that only 25% of schools were using biometrics. When I rang round the secondary high schools, that rose to 72% of schools. So there's a significant hiding of schools using this technology. So if we apply the same criteria to the Big Brother Watch, 61% who didn't reply, the figure of 3,200 schools, children using biometrics leaps up to 6.5 million. Now we've got about 8 million school kids in the UK. That's a large proportion of schools using biometrics, primarily in secondary, but primary as well. But I think more than the issue of how many children's fingerprints are on databases is actually the question of what percentage of children leave the British education system being acclimatised to using their biometrics for food, library books, access and things like that. Because that's the experience they're going to have. That's the normalisation of using your biometrics for mundane experiences. So I figured out there were about 680,000 children per year group in the UK. So we have year groups from reception through to year 11, which is 4 through to 16. The 5 years that is secondary school, there's about 3.4 million children. And even if you apply that to the Big Brother Watch figure, that's a big percentage of children using biometrics. So really, and it doesn't surprise me at all, that I think probably nearly 100% of school children experience using biometrics going through. And we don't, as a population, experience that at all. We don't use our biometrics unless you've got a phone. But No to ID were really good with us. They sort of could see, because they were fighting biometric national ID cards from 2000 to 2010. And they could sort of see this as a way for the government to soften the next generation to being compliant to giving up their biometrics for everyday use. So they were a big help for us. And it has done. The mobile phone technology you can open it with a face scan, or you can open it with a fingerprint. And I think it's probably, though I don't know, I've got those statistics on this, the younger generation that's finding that more acceptable because they've, since 2001, been used to using biometrics. So Richard Thomas, who was the the Information Commissioner at the time, recommended that the House of Commons have a look at a surveillance society. He was really big on privacy, and he has said on a number of occasions we're sleepwalking into a surveillance society. And so a House of Commons Select Committee was set up, and David Smith, who was the Deputy Commissioner at the time, had made quite a strong statement in the fact that he was asked can police have access to a children's biometric database. So his answer was, the police can make an access request. The school looks at, would we breach the Data Protection Act if we respond to the police? And if they can say that not giving the information would be likely to prejudice prevention or detection of crime, and crime doesn't say a level of crime, or the apprehension or prosecution of an offender, then they can give the information, the biometric information, without breaching the Data Protection Act. And a low level of crime would justify that. He then went on to say that the school wouldn't have to tell the parent or child that they'd given that biometric data over to the police. Kim Cameron, Microsoft's architect, he said that these digital algorithms are transferable between databases, and he's completely right. So even if a database in a school comes from a different supplier with a different algorithm to the National Ident One police fingerprint DNA database, there are programs that can enable the templates to be transferred across. And this actually dates back to way back when, when different states had different fingerprinting systems, and somebody would go over the state border, and they began to realize, actually, we need our fingerprint systems to talk to one another, and that's how that particular program was developed. So yeah, and so we thought at the time, shall we send all the police forces a Freedom of Information request? This was back in 2007, just to see if that's happened. And we sort of decided, as parents and Privacy International thought, well, actually, I don't think we will, because I think what we'll probably do more than anything else is give them a heads up that they could do it. So we actually sat on that and we didn't do anything with it. However, in May 2013, I actually thought, do you know what? The police are probably savvy to the fact that schools are using these databases and they can access the information. So I sent the 48 police forces in the UK, I think there's 43 regional ones and there's 5 railway, nuclear defence, that sort of. So I asked all of them if they'd ever accessed a system, a biometric system in school, and whether or not they'd had any convictions or anything like that. 4 of them didn't even answer my request. 2 forces answered stating they had no information on that at all, so I take it that's a no. 4 forces stated they had not accessed the school biometric database, and the rest of them refused to answer. So I sent all the Freedom of Information requests out over a period of 2 days, and what I guess probably happened was that the Association of Police Chief Officers issued a memo and said, look, don't answer this. I mean, well, it's not a difficult one, is it? Have you had access to a school database? They must have some record of that somewhere. So they were citing costs, that it was more than 18 hours of work at £25 an hour, and under the Freedom of Information Act, you can refuse data on that basis. So, I think they were sort of damned if they do and damned if they don't. If they'd have said, yes, we have accessed a school biometric database, then that would have hit the headlines being controversial, and it would have killed the industry dead in the water with schools. If they'd have said, no, we haven't accessed any school databases, then the question would be, why not? Because there's 9 million kids there that have got their fingerprints on a database. Why would you not access that level of data to solve a crime? Not that I agree with that, but I could see that question being asked. So we don't know where the information is going. The government say they're not collating fingerprints of children on a national level. I haven't got any proof to say they're doing that. They certainly collate a lot of data for children on a national level that goes on to something called the National Pupil Database. So why would they not collect fingerprints? I don't know. As I say, I've got no proof to say that they are. So that's the sort of current state with biometric technology in schools at the moment. And when the Protection of Freedom Act was passed in 2012, it didn't actually become enforceable till September 2013. So I had a period from May 2012 till September 2013 where I thought, I can have a rest. I don't have to do anything. I've done it. And so I thought, okay, so I just wonder what the situation is in the UK with radio frequency identification, because there had been one instance of it in 2007 that quickly got sort of pulled out the water. So I thought, I'll just do some Googling. This was the summertime of 2012. And I don't know if anybody else is aware of Andrea Hernandez and the situation that happened in San Antonio that summer, but a North Side School District had issued hundreds of thousands of tags to the school students there. They were active, so they were emitting radiation. So let's go back a slide, actually. So there's 2 types of RFID, which is active and passive. So an active radio identification is where you're holding something and it's emitting a signal. And then a reader will pick up the signal, triangulate your position, and know where the tag is. The other type of RFID is passive, which is what you see on your contactless cash cards and things like that. In fact, if you've got a sign like this on a cash card, it means that you've got an RFID chip there that will wake up when it passes in front of a reader, exchange information, and then go back to sleep again when it comes away. You can't particularly get triangulated by using passive RFID. You could if the readers were sensitive enough to pick up whatever you were carrying from a distance. We're told that contactless cash cards are only sort of working if you go up to a reader and do this. But actually, they might not be. Some passive RFID is trackable at a larger distance. But anyway, it was the active RFID that was being used in, this is Andrea, San Antonio. But before that, and this was what I was aware of when I was campaigning for the biometrics, they were using, this was 28,000 passive tags were given to kids to get on and off school buses. And in 2005 in California, Britain Elementary School had trialled an active RFID for attendance, so the kids were wearing chips around their necks. And that went around the world. It went viral, and privacy groups said, no, you can't do that, it's terrible, tracking the kids. And so that just, that was taken out of the school virtually immediately. But 2012, this is Andrea, I think Catherine Altbeck has it right. She said it was the wrong time to introduce RFID then. We weren't accustomed to it. Now we've been brought up with mobile telephones and effectively walking around with a triangulation device on us. It's more acceptable now to hang RFID tags around children's necks to see where they are. And so Andrea refused to wear her tag on religious grounds, and she was actually suspended. The school suspended her. So if you're not wearing it, that's it. They stopped her from participating in school events initially. They stopped her from being part of the community. And the school eventually went to her and said, look, why don't we issue you with a pretend tag so it looks like you're conforming? And Andrea said, no, I'm not doing that. And good for her, she sort of stuck her neck out, and so did her family, really nice family. And so the school said, right, you're suspended. So she actually had to go to another school. She took North Side School District to court, and unfortunately lost because I don't know the legal system in the States, but it was heard at a state level rather than a local level. But that's a whole other story. But anyway, in July 2013, the whole point of that RFID was to improve children's attendance, like hanging a tag around a kid next to it makes them get up earlier and walk to school a bit better, I don't know. But anyway, it didn't work, and the whole system was scrapped, so she then went back to high school. But this is what happened in the UK in 2007. Hunger Hill High School in Doncaster trialled some RFID chips that were going to be sewn into a school uniform. And the obvious thing that sort of comes to mind here is, if you were a kid, you'd just leave your coat at school, wouldn't you? You'd just go and play hooky somewhere, nobody would know. And you'd look like you're still at school. And the same with this as well. It's not rocket science. I mean, you'd give your tag to somebody, wouldn't you? And in actual fact, it creates sort of a more dangerous situation for a child, perhaps, because you can get led into a false sense of security that the child's on school premises when it's not. So I thought, I'll have a Google, see if anything's happening in the UK. And it was. West Cheshire College is a big college in Cheshire, and it had started tagging the children there in 2010. So this was an article from the RFID Journal from April 2012. And this was the supplier of the RFID's press release. And again, this was in April 2012. So, and the RFID Journal is great because it's really geeky and it goes into great detail. So I knew exactly what these kids were carrying. So the active chips they were carrying was emitting a frequency of 6.35 to 6.75 gigahertz every second for 24 hours a day, held on a lanyard around their neck. They had the battery lifespan of 7 years, and the receivers could read tags for up to 328 feet away, which is 100 meters. That's huge. A normal Wi-Fi router operating at sort of 2.4 gigahertz, it can be sort of 60 foot. This is 328 feet. That's the size of a football pitch. This is how much and how powerful the radiation was that was coming off these tags. This RFID that's put across a band of radio frequencies called ultra-wideband. It's actually come from the military, which doesn't come as any surprise because the biometric stuff did as well. So the school was literally looking at a computer with green blobs moving around. They could see where they were to within an accuracy of a meter in real time every second. The system was being updated every second. Pardon me. And they tagged 5,500 students. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to ask some freedom of information requests. Because the way it worked in Parliament is MPs, regardless of how you feel about our political system, we've got what we've got, and I made it work for us, or we made it work for us. MPs will ask questions in Parliament if they're absolutely certain of what they're asking is fact. So the only way you can do that is to ask freedom of information requests, get facts, give them to MPs, and then they'll start to ask questions because they know that they're dealing with facts. So I sent the college some freedom of information requests. How did you gain consent? Have you told the parents about it? How much did it cost? I want to see the minutes of the meetings where anybody thought it was a good idea to tag a kid. And they basically couldn't answer me. The only answer they could give me was that they'd informed the kids at enrolment that they were going to have a tag, but they were wearing these tags alongside other tags. So they had like a lanyard around their neck with a travel card tag, a canteen card tag, and this other tag. So it wasn't just a tag for itself. And this, hopefully this will work. Nope, it's not. That was a promotional video. No, that's not working. Never mind. So yeah, the Zebra Technologies did a promotional video on their website about it, and I downloaded it, and I downloaded the RFID Journal article and the Zebra press release. And when I'd started answering these freedom of information requests to the college, and it became clear that the college actually hadn't asked for any consent of the pupils or parents, those two articles disappeared right off the internet. The RFID Journal took its article down, Zebra Technologies took their article down, they took the video down. I'd already taken a copy of the video, so I stuck it up on YouTube. They chased me around YouTube 3 or 4 times to get it taken down. I put it on Vimeo. They got it taken off Vimeo. And a very kind guy from the States said, look, the copyright laws are different over here. I'll put it up. And so the promotional video now exists, hosted by somebody in the States. But going back to the Data Protection Act, if you're going to tag somebody with RFID, it will definitely bring up these elements of sensitive data, because a child could be going to a meeting, maybe, for political or religious beliefs. It would certainly tell you whether the child was going for regular counselling or not. And maybe there's LGBT group that it wanted to go to at college or something like that. So again, it's contravening the Act. And apart from anything else, it's a ubiquitous surveillance. They're not just giving a fingerprint, they're getting used to it. And the college actually admitted, this is in the RFID Journal, that we're looking at them in groups. So that particular technology was deployed in 2010 and 2011. They had 2 big new build colleges, one in 2010, one in 2011. So the kids have been wearing it for at least two years. But the standard, it was unstandardized. The standard that was applied to it was approved in February 2012. And that's when the RFID Journal and Zebra Technologies said, it's a great standard, it's brilliant. And then said it's a return on investment for the college, and Zebra said, we've developed this. So the ultra-wideband RFID was supplied and pioneered by Zebra Technologies, and Tim Harrington, who's the vice president of Zebra Technologies, sat on the IEEE working board for this standard. So hang on a minute, what? Maybe they were testing it on the kids. So this was the chip. This is the inside of the chip. I managed to get hold of a chip. I had a very kind parent that sent me one. This is it here. It was hung around the neck in a lanyard, like that. I mean, my first thought when I saw that was, crikey, that looks like a motherboard. But I've actually had somebody look at it, and he sort of explained what it was. But it's fairly sophisticated technology. So I thought, I wonder, just from a radiation point of view, how this would affect the community in far as radio frequencies go, because there's a lot of controversy about that, and it's not my area of subject, but I just thought, I'd be interested, I'll see what one tag can do on the community. So I went to Blacon, which is part of the catchment for the college, and I picked one house right in the centre of the cross, and I blobbed all the other houses within a 100-metre radius. So there were a lot of homes that were being affected by the frequency coming from one tag. There were 133 homes from one tag. On an average of 2.3 people per household, that's 306 people with one tag. And actually, if there's 500,000 kids, that could be up to 150,000 people affected from the frequencies of the tags that were in the community. The RFID got closed down in March 2013. I think I'd made such a pain of myself to the college. I complained to the Information Commissioner a number of times because they just were completely incapable of answering any of my freedom of information requests. And the Information Commissioner actually took on board what I was saying, said to the college, right, you've got to tell her how much this costs, you've got to tell what the consent was and the purchasing process, and they did. they actually had a change of principle in that time of my complaining, the Information Commissioner saying that, and so the new principal offered the information and I got it. The RFID system they had fitted cost £1,050,242, which is outrageous for one RFID system. I mean, the biometric systems were coming in about, at the very most, £30,000 for a cashless catering system, all integrated. But £1 million on RFID, this is any tax, VAT. And that's our money that's spent on that, on a technology that was being developed by the supplier for the IEEE standard. So I'd written to the Children's Commissioner on a couple of occasions and said, this is wrong on all levels. It violates privacy, civil liberties, apart from any of the health effects carrying an active radio frequency device could have here. And I got an acknowledgement for my first reply and nothing from a second reply. And I thought, do you know what? Nobody's listening to the privacy aspect of this. So I rang the Public Accounts Committee in Parliament and said, they look at misspends of public money. And I said, would you be interested in looking at a misspend of public money? And they said, well, we don't normally take requests from members of the public, but what is it? So I explained, and they said, yeah, put a report together and we'll have a look at it. So I did. And they referred it to the National Audit Office, and there was an investigation. So nobody listened to the privacy, health concerns, or civil liberties, but talk money, and people start jumping around. But the conclusion of that was I got a letter from Margaret Hodge MP about 6 months ago, and she said, oh, it's historic, we can't do anything about it. But at least I tried. So the technology that we're using in San Antonio was an active RFID chip at 433.92 megahertz. So the frequency is significantly lower than the ultra-wideband at 6.35 to 75 gigahertz. And in April 2013, I had an email from a guy in the States purporting to be ex-government RFID expert. And he sort of said, because I set up when the RFID sort of started in the UK, I set up an Against RFID blog in schools. And I started blogging about that. And he sort of got in touch with me via that blog and said, this is a government plan to basically chip the population, or get all the population to carry microchips. And although I'm not immune to that idea, I'm in fact quite receptive to it, I just thought, okay. Anyway, so about 2 months later, I decided to look into it, and I can't fault that he was probably right. 433.92 megahertz is also compatible with the IEEE standard that was being developed at West Cheshire College. And it has an ISO number. This ISO number is an intellectual patent owned by a company called Savvy, who was owned by Lockheed Martin up to 2012. And Savvy supplied from 2004 onwards the US Department of Defense with active RFID chips, so they could chip containers going to and from whatever countries they were going to. 150 of them. The USA has 150 has troops in 150 companies, and also Savvy was supplying this to NATO, and they've got 28 countries they've got troops in and equipment. And this is the exact same frequency that the kids in San Antonio are wearing. And the big thing that school was saying was, well, don't worry, nobody else can track them outside school. Well, actually, yes, I can, because the military has got receivers for this active RFID in ports. It's called an in-transit visibility network. And so in strategic sort of ports and various points around the country, they can pick up on this frequency, the exact same frequency. And then interestingly enough, the passive frequency, which is 3.56 megahertz, which is the frequency of which your contactless cards go to, can also be picked up by these readers because it's harmonically compatible. So if you times 3.56 by 32, you get 433.92, which is the megahertz. So 43392, the international standards number, is also compatible with IPv6, which is the next Internet Protocol version system. At the moment, we're using IPv4, which has got 4.3 billion IP addresses, and we're rapidly running out of them. IPv6 has already been set up, and that has 3.4 to the power of 10 to 38, 340 trillion IP addresses. So this is what the Internet of Things has been run up to. This is a company called Guard RFID that is supplying school systems with 433 megahertz. Where does it say that? Yeah, there it says there, 433 at the bottom. And here is the same company supplying the exact same frequency to defense departments. So schools seem to be the test bed for different technologies, and this cropped up in May 2014, the Internet of Things, being tested in 8 schools, piloted in 8 schools, not tested. So I asked the Department of Business Innovation in Schools, who was running the project, are the kids being tagged? Because that was, that was the thing. And they actually said, no, they're not. So alarm bells went down a bit, but even so, it's the Internet of Things. It's not being used in adult society, it's being used in education. This is something that sort of raised its head again May last year. They were live streaming schools, CCTV from schools. Just let me see if this audio will work.
BBC Radio Merseyside.
Schools on Merseyside that have a problem with drugs being used on their premises could soon be introducing new security cameras to combat it. The Department of Education has allowed one Liverpool school to take part in a trial of equipment provided by a West Midlands security company called WatchBot. Richard Hillgrove is a spokesman for the company WatchBot. I spoke to him earlier on.
The trial's already underway, and we are getting schools that have been classified or are regarded being placed in the highest drug problem areas for young people.
So this is the company WatchBot. So the idea is you get IPTV, CCTV cameras, internet version protocol cameras, and you can watch images on your phone. And this is what they were proposing that parents could do. The parents could log into the school CCTV system and just watch the kids, but not just watch their kids, watch everybody else's kids as well. I mean, I don't know if anybody works in schools, but you can't step foot in a school in the UK without being accredited or having some DRB check. But yet, here's a sort of a scheme where it allows anybody really just to log in and look at the feeds from CCTV cameras. So I sent an information request to the ICO, Information Commissioner's Office, and said, how can this not be breaking the Data Protection Act? And they said, well, it probably is, but we can't respond to anything unless concerns are raised, because we're reactive, not proactive. So I thought, okay, well, I'll raise a concern. The radio interview went on to say that the school's identity was protected for privacy reasons. So I thought, oh, God. Okay, so I thought, okay, so I'll send a freedom of information request to all 61 schools in the authorities that are running this. So I sent them out in September last year, and it says 2015, it should be 2014. I had a really poor response rate. 18% of schools responded by mid-November, by mid-October, and I thought, oh. So the next step after you don't get a response is to then go back to the authority and say, well, can you conduct an internal review to say why you didn't give me my data? And I got 62% response from my internal reviews by mid-November, and all these responses had come back saying, no, we're not using it, no, we're not using it. So I got the Information Commissioner's Office involved, and they then got in touch with the schools and said, can you answer this? Because they were quite keen to see which schools were using it so they could have a look at the process of this live streaming CCTV images, which as I'm aware, that's not happening anywhere else in the world. And we got a 100% response rate by mid-March, and every single secondary school came back and said, no, we're not using this. I was like, well, the articles were saying it was drug-related, and that was the reason why. Surely, we haven't got drugs in primary schools. But anyway, so we have an option here, and this is I'm still ongoing with this at the moment. We've either got an option that 4 schools are lying under the Freedom of Information Act, which they should not be doing, because that's like giving an answer in a court of law. B, that classroom images of primary school children are being live streamed, which could be a possibility. Or that the company WatchBot duped the BBC into free advertising. So I got back in touch with the BBC, and I've got the 2 journalists that were working on it there, sort of looking into that. So that, as far as the UK is concerned, is the sort of situation of surveillance in schools. So the next generation is being well-groomed, in my opinion, to accept high levels of surveillance for everyday life actions. So what's going on a national level? In September last year, the House of Commons Select Committee had a discussion on current and future use of biometric data and technologies, of which I submitted an entry to it. Anybody can submit entries to these committees. And another 20 or so other people did, including the Biometrics Commissioner, the Association of Police Chief Officers, the Institute of Biometrics, different defence companies, developers, universities. And what came to light was that ACPO, the Association of Police Chief Officers, had been running covertly a facial image system on the custody sweep photographs of 18 million people. But funnily enough, in their submission to the House of Commons Select Committee, didn't make any mention at all. They even put, for this reason, it's about the current use of imagery, facial imagery. For this reason, information on the number of images held and their use is still not collated nationally. It is. They just lied. The future developments failed to mention at all that they were using facial recognition on a national database. All they mentioned was in West Midlands Police, for example, the partner Accenture are looking at the application of face in the crowd technologies across a wealth of CCTV footage available. So they didn't even mention that they were doing it, but they did mention that regional forces were doing it. So this is the Mirror's headline. And the BBC did a great article as well, actually. So I decided to have a look and see what ACPO, what their history on this was. And in actual fact, this is minutes of a meeting that was held in October 2012. Item 17 on that meeting was Police National Database, facial recognition functionality. The Association of Police Chief Officers have been looking at applying facial recognition to a national database of photographs since 2012, yet failed to mention it in a House Commons Select Committee report in 2014. The Biometrics Commissioner his remit is only for DNA and fingerprints, so he really doesn't have any sort of say over what's going on the facial recognition side of things, and was rightly sort of spitting blood at the fact that ACPO hadn't been honest with them. So I sent a Freedom of Information request, because I don't want my image to be read, you know, and I got some information back from them. It went functionality, the system went functional on the 28th of March. There was no privacy impact assessment done. This is something you should do under the Data Protection Act to actually assess whether you're invading somebody's privacy. They've been doing 4,000 facial searches between March and February this year. They said to me they only had 13.7 million facial images on the database, yet the BBC reported there was 18 million. So where 4.3 million images are, I don't know. And I asked who had access to it. So they said, well, we've got 12,000 users are people that can have access to it by not just the UK law enforcement partner agencies, but the sort of police, but also UK enforcement partner agencies, which may include immigration officers, magistrates, constabulary, to name but a few. So I got back to them and said, well, what agencies are having access to this database? And said, well, there's no comprehensive list, so we can't tell you. So there's 18 million, possibly 18 million people's images held on a national database that's been scanned with facial recognition technology from things like body-worn cameras, CCTV on buses, CCTV on streets, and they couldn't tell me how many innocent people on the database. They weren't definite in where the images requiring identification was coming from, and they couldn't actually tell me where the database of images on the police national database were coming from either, even though the BBC reported they were custodial suites images. So it's all very vague. I'm just going to whiz through these couple of slides. So the conclusion of the committee was that, we're not against police using biometric technologies to combat crime and terrorism, whatever. But they were alarmed to discover that the police have begun updating custody photographs of people to the police national database and using facial recognition software without any regulatory oversight, and some of the people that have not even been charged. So there's innocent people on there, and the police are covering it up. I'm going to try and play this slide. Oh, yes.
Now, one of our police forces is testing powerful new technology that can put a name to a face. It's able to identify suspects who've been caught on camera in just seconds.
Leicestershire police say it could transform the way they catch criminals. Our social affairs correspondent Jeremy Ball reports.
CCTV has become a vital part of police investigations. Footage that shows who's at the scene of a crime, but identifying the suspects can take weeks of detective work. Now, though, Hillary can find a match in seconds using this new facial recognition software. This demonstration shows how a police employee is picked out from a database of every suspect whose picture's on the force computer system. It can even spot family members with similar facial features.
It is amazing to be able to sort through 92,000 images in a matter of moments, and it's just going to be such a useful tool to officers out on the street. It could be low-level shoplift to murder scenes, crime scenes. It's not DNA, it's not a fingerprint, it's a suggestion. This person is potentially of interest to your inquiry.
They're checking footage from these new body-worn cameras as well as shops, buses and sports grounds. The results can't be used as evidence in court, but the trial's already identified around 100 suspects.
That has potentially saved us tens of thousands of hours sifting through photographs, it may well find individuals who might never have been brought to justice before. So it makes a huge difference.
Some people will be worried, won't they, that this is a bit Big Brother, that it's very powerful technology that can track people's lives?
That's a really important question, and one I'm really pleased you've asked. It's searching databases of people who have been arrested, who we have lawfully got their photograph of. It's not searching the database of anything else.
For now, this is just a trial, but Leicestershire Police think this facial recognition system's more advanced than anywhere else in the world. And it's already attracting interest from other forces as far afield as France and Romania. Jeremy Ball, BBC's Midlands Today, Leicester.
So that's the company that's supplying Leicestershire Police with facial recognition. Leicestershire Police are not using that particular type of facial recognition at the minute. They're just looking at 92 to 100,000 images on a database, just using it to compare images. But given the fact that ACPO switched the button to go live with the facial recognition system without telling anybody in March last year, what's to say that this sort of technology wouldn't be run behind the CCTV systems that's hanging off buildings in the street? We don't know. I mean, they say they're not doing it. But ACPO, again, they weren't honest about what they were doing with facial recognition. So West Midlands Police, this is what ACPO had said. They're looking at facing the crowd to the House of Commons Select Committee. So I asked West Midlands Police, where are you up to with that? They said, well, no, we've not commissioned it, we've no plans to implement it, but we are looking at a potential opportunity of it. And I've got a friend in Birmingham who's actually noticed that the CCTV cameras are coming down. They're coming down to about 8 foot in height. Which is exactly what the Met Police want to do.
I'm a big fan of surveillance cameras. I think we need to have more of them, don't you?
Yes. The only thing we've got a strategy to encourage people to do with their cameras is to move them down to eye level.
Oh, of course, because normally it's tops of people's heads. And that's not very useful.
Spot on. So over the last year, as facial recognition software has got better, it means that we can apply the software to the images of burglaries or robberies or whatever. We can compare those images with the images we take when we arrest people. So when we arrest people, we arrest about 250,000 people a year. And everybody we arrest, we take their fingerprints, their DNA, and their photograph. And what we need to be able to do is to compare that photograph with the images we've got of people who commit crime. And exactly as you've just explained it, is that taking the tops of their heads is not that helpful with facial recognition, which relies on your eyes and this configuration around the nose and the mouth. So we try and get people, ideally, to add another camera at face level, because of course the camera
won't it? They'd just run up and smash it, wouldn't they?
Well, not necessarily. They may do, but what we see is that most criminals are pretty disorganised. They don't think about it, and of course you can pretty covertly. You don't have to make it blindingly obvious. So the reason the cameras are high is twofold. One, exactly again what you just said, which is to keep it out of harm's way. But more, as importantly, is do you get a whole shot of what happened at the event. What did they do when they came in? What did they steal? Did they use a knife? You get all that. But what's become more relevant today is a face. That's what we need. So if anybody's listening who's got a business, at least think about installing a new one. They're cheap, relatively, he said. But number two is that if you can't buy a new one, could you think about moving it? It gives a real opportunity.
So this was an interview by Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe, who's head of the Met Police. And he went on the 9th of March on a radio show and said, yeah, we want to bring the cameras down because we want to see this part of your face and not that part of your head, sort of thing. And he was encouraging people to covertly hide CCTV cameras behind clocks and stuff like that. So I thought, well, I'll ask them a freedom of information request. That's what I do. And it's a way to get good data. So I asked them in March exactly what it was they were running, who was supplying it, how many images they were scanning, and I was due back a reply on the 10th of April. And then on the 14th of April, the Met Police apologised for the delay and said they'll reply by the 8th of May, which I think, well, that's okay, because I'll have it in time for AV6. So I went back to them and said, well, that's great, but can I ask what the reason for the delay is? And they said, well, we can't answer question 14, citing costs. So I thought, okay, then, well, don't answer question 14. There were 15 questions. And so they got back to me and said, well, we'll answer question 14, but now we're going to consider this a new freedom of information request. We've got another 20 days to reply, so we're going to reply by the 22nd of May. So I went back to them and said, no, hang on, that doesn't how it works. You've got to give me the information I asked for on the 12th of March, omitting question 14. And this can be a typical way that a freedom of information request goes, and this is how authorities expect you to go away. They just fob you off. So on the 30th of April, the Met Police said they couldn't answer question 8 also, so I got back to them and said, that's great, don't answer question 8, but I want an internal review as to why I can't answer and give them my data. So they said reply by the 26th of May for my second FOIA, which they then thought was this, without question 8. So on the 7th of May, I reply, omitting the question 8 and question 14. And then they got back to me the same day and said, OK, that's good, we'll consider it a new Freedom of Information request and reply to you by the 5th of June. So I just put a complaint in the Information Commissioner's office because that's just not good enough. So the two questions they couldn't answer were, how successful has the facial recognition system been, which is not an unreasonable question, because if you're going to invest money in a new technology, presumably you want to know what the success rate is. So they couldn't answer that, and they couldn't answer how many innocent people were on the database. Pretty fundamental questions, I'd have thought. So this is the situation nationally. We have a system called Cognitex supplying what is now the NPCC, which is National Police Chiefs Council. ACPO no longer exists. That got changed about a month ago. We've got Kent, because when I asked Leicestershire Police where they were up to with this neck neofacial technology, they said, oh, we've got other forces that have been showing interest. So I asked them who they were, and they were these forces. And these were the reasons and where they're up to with facial recognition technology. So Lancashire are running an internal trial at the moment. North Wales have it under review. Kent, no plans. Metropolitan Police, we don't know, because they won't tell us. And this is what's happening in West Midlands at the moment. Going back to that slide, the overall data controller really of the whole lot is the Home Office, and the Home Office have access to the passport photograph database, and they use facial recognition at the moment, so they know they're familiar with facial recognition. And in fact, Accenture, who were now running the West Midlands Police, work with VisionBox, so there's connections between the companies. So I've been talking for an hour and 10 minutes, and I need to. Have I got time to do the Glasgow stuff? Yep. Okay.
Glasgow is Scotland's biggest city. It's got a population of 600,000 people. It has the most tourism. It's also the host of the Commonwealth Games and is now recognised internationally and across Europe as a go-to destination. Community Safety Glasgow was established to tackle crime and antisocial behaviour. And we always focus very strongly on the use of technology and how technology could improve public protection. With the right partner, and we believe NICE is the right partner for us, we could develop systems and functionality that would transform how we operate within the city. The Operations Centre allows us to bring functions together that were in separate silos, and that's currently happening.
We have around 442 cameras throughout the city. We also have up to 30 redeployable or mobile cameras and a variety of mobile vehicles, all streaming live into the Operations Centre. One of the key drivers was to look at how do we embrace new technology and try and get something that's going to enable that sharing of information, sharing of various resources, assets. The new system, Situator and Nice Vision, that is installed on all the workstations. Operators can have at any point up to 32 live video streams in front of them. That's what we wanted this new technology and kit to be able to give us, is that functionality to display 10 images or 500 images. The new functions that we're going to have is ease of access to a much broader suite of cameras, communication with key partners, tracking individuals, looking at incidents, and from a traffic point of view, we certainly would be looking at how can we aid and sort of make traffic management within the City of Glasgow much more efficient. The Situator coming in is enabling us to start doing that. Operators are able to pull up images a lot quicker from various sources, very seamless. You know, that's a key thing for us. It has to be seamless, and that has started, that process has started. You can never replace an operator. I think the human element will always remain, but what we can do is make the operator a lot more efficient. New mapping systems, the new management systems that we're talking about in terms of our business processes, these are the bits that really excite us, because these are the bits that are going to take us to the next level. The NICE product's picked for a number of reasons. One, it scored the highest, but the organisation behind it as well was something that was certainly considered. We need an organisation that is stable and was going to be here for the long run.
And this relationship that we have with NICE we have found a receptive partner that we regard as equals. Technology will be the future for smart cities, to deliver better services, more effective services. When we are finished and we have reached the destination, we would become a benchmark and role model for other cities across the world.
To what's happening in Glasgow. But so what's happening in Glasgow? There was a £24 million grant that went out to any city that wanted to be smart in the UK. So there were 29 applicants for it, and Glasgow City Council won. So Glasgow is our first UK smart city, and in fact, they market themselves as being the smartest, most intelligent smart city on the planet. So they're smarter than smart cities in the Far East because they have smart cities over there. So it's like super smart city. And the company that's overseeing the super smart city is a company called Community Safety Glasgow, who are a charity and limited company. This used to be community services at Glasgow City Council, but in 2008, 2006, the council hived off that part of its services and made it into a limited company, and it is owned by Glasgow City Council and the Scottish Police Authority. It's jointly owned. It's the only model of this type in the UK, and other councils are looking to do a similar sort of thing, hiving off different services, but the council still owning it as a limited company. So, so we've got the council and the Scottish Police Authority owning this company. And here we have the branch, another limited company owned by the limited company that is Community Safety Glasgow, that are delivering the security services in the city. So you have enforcement officers walking around with body-worn cameras. And we have another company that's owned by Community Safety Glasgow called Glasgow Security Services Community Interest Company. And do you know what? There's barely anything on the internet about that company. The only thing I can find out from Companies House is that that's turning over about £4.8 million a year, and this is turning over about £400,000 a year. So I don't know what that's doing. So the future city has an new operations centre, of which £12 million was spent on. Half of the £24 million was spent on an operations centre, the biggest of its type in Europe. Active travel, which encourages members of the public to tell the council how they've been travelling. Energy efficiency, which involves looking at heat sensors in houses and council buildings. Social transport, which is, again, another hived-off part of the council, now a limited company that's taking people to hospital, children to schools, supplying catering services, that sort of thing. Street lighting, which is really interesting, and citizen science mapping, which is encouraging citizens to upload where they've been for a meal, what foods are trending, sort of useless information like that. So this, when you go into the website of Future City Glasgow, this is what you can go into different areas. It's quite interesting, but not terribly interesting. And this is sort of information you can pull up. You can see where the energy usage is in the city. You've also got maps that can tell you where the allotments are, where nice walks are, that sort of thing. And this is the operations centre in Blockhairn, and it was interesting when Brian was saying that communities are working with police more. Well, this particular communication centre has got 4 resident police officers on site. So the officers are working in conjunction with the council, the limited company. It's also directly linked to the Police Force Control Centre, and it's the largest control centre in Europe. Glasgow City Council have got 422 static CCTV cameras and 30 mobile cameras and sensors, and all this information is being fed through into this control centre along with other data that's coming in. So the sort of thing they can do through the CCTV is it will allow faces to be created on the basis of witness statements and photographs and matched with CCTV images, removing the requirement for police to scan hours of film. It can start to predict crime, so algorithms in the system which learn and evolve to associate data sets and predict the place and time and what types of crime will be committed. I just wonder at what point will they start to predict who will be making the crime. And I found this out last week from a Financial Times article. Sensors installed in the homes of elderly people in council houses will allow observers to tell when they've got up in the morning, what rooms they're using, and manage how warm and deep the bath is. It's this word here that bothers me. And it's not monitor, it's manage. What's the long-term plan for managing how deep and warm a bath is? Is it water rationing? possibly. So that's the sort of thing the operations centre can, sort of data it can process. So this is the active travel, again, as it was encouraging people to walk and cycle and to share routes. And one of the ways they're incentivising children to active travel and put their geolocation on an app that goes straight to this control centre is to, if you walk so many miles a week, we'll give you cinema tickets. So they're encouraging citizens to upload their data by rewarding them for it. This is interesting. Motion sensors on lights will sense an approaching cyclist's increased brightness. Pardon me. This is about energy efficiency. So they've got management systems in different buildings to talk to the power network and reduce demand for energy by taking the weather into account and lighting and heating. They've got sensors in buildings that give off half-hourly meter readings, and they're wireless. So, the word smart meter has never been used in this project, but that sounds like a smart meter to me if it's given off half-hourly meter readings. And again, there's contention around the whole smart meter agenda. But they're not saying it's a smart meter, but it's got all the functionality of a meter that is smart. This is the social transport. They're looking, again, this is what this particular part is a limited company that used to be part of the council. And this is the part of the project. This has got a turnover of £140 million. So this is the street lighting. These are motion sensors, pardon me, motion sensors that collect traffic data and collection and storage. And this is what it looks like. It's probably about this big. This motion sensor senses this. Now that's a CCTV camera to me. That's sensing not motion so much as it's recording images. So on top of the 422, you've got these images as well, and you've also got the images from the body-worn cameras from the enforcement officers, which this article here details. They're starting, these people, these enforcement officers, sort of look after irresponsible dog owners and get people sort of for dropping litter, but yet they're walking around wearing another form of CCTV. These are sensors that track noise. They're recording, essentially, or they're able to record speech. Speech comes in about 60 to 70 decibels, and they're recording noises from 45 to 90. Whispering is about 30, so if you don't want to be heard by one of these things in Glasgow, you get yourself either whispering or you get yourself 6 foot away from a lamppost that has one of those. This is what it looks like. They have air pollution monitors that look like this, which I think looks very similar to that, but the other way around. So if you see something that looks like that, I would take it that it's recording. And this is the citizen science mapping that they're encouraging people to sort of bring up what they're doing, when they're doing it, and what it is they're doing. So they're not actually running facial recognition system behind it, or emotional intelligence, which is gathered by social media sites. But they are going to run something called suspect search, which is, we talked about soft biometrics at the airport in Brisbane, that looks at different aspects of you, your clothing, your hair. This is what they're running, so they can actually track people with it.
If you need to locate the owner of this unattended baggage, you'd best hope it's not here. If this child were lost, it would be easy to find him here. But what if it was here? Or here? Or here? These are situations in which locating your target within minutes is essential. With Nice Suspect Search, the next generation video search and track application, you can do it easily. Instead of watching hours of video, it presents you with the relevant images, so you can run the search across a vast number of security cameras and locations to find a person of interest within minutes and automatically track their route on a map. Enhancing situational awareness, enabling immediate response, and expediting forensic searches, Nice Suspect Search can help you reduce your search time from hours to minutes. Nice Suspect Search, when time is of the essence.
The company behind this is a company called Nice, which probably isn't very nice at all. an Israeli company. Privacy International did a report into NICE and Verint, which are two big companies that are supplying surveillance systems. And this is what they said. This is exactly the kind of nightmare scenario that becomes inevitable when you have an unaccountable industry operating under the radar. It is striking how many of the industry participants and government officials are already aware of how this surveillance technology is being used or misused pardon me, by the state. So this is what we've got coming, smart cities. This is Interpol World. Smart cities were high on the agenda there. And this system got turned on in India last week, and this is the facial recognition running behind the CCTV. So they're one step ahead of us. And this is really what we've got coming here. Sorry, I'm going to... Sorry. So everything is interconnected, including us, which is why I think the biometrics agenda is high, because they want, in order for Internet of Things to be accurate, they need us to be accurate. They need us to be verified, and sort of these chips can now be verified with biometrics. So this is an RFID chip that's attached to somebody in an old-age person's home in Canada. They can geo-fence. So when the chip goes out of a certain area, people know that the person's gone out of the area, and they can go and attend to the person. This is a baby wearing RFID monitoring. This monitors the position they're in, the heartbeat, that sort of thing. So I'm going to finish there because I've gone on a bit longer than I should have done. These are my websites. I've got a Biometrics in School website that's been going about 10 years against RFID in schools, which covers the RFID in schools agenda. And because it starts to overlap with everything else that's going on, myself and two or three other people are writing on a website called State of Surveillance at the moment, which sort of brings it all together. But thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Pippa. Thank you. Outstanding. You know, one of the things that I hope struck you about Pippa, never hear her say, "Have you thought of?" She says, "I have done. This is what I've done. This is what we're doing. You know, this is the plan of action." You know, this is positive activism. You know, in this case, this is using their tools to challenge their system. And if you don't use the tools, then who's to blame? It is thanks to Pippa that the RFID agenda in schools hasn't got off first base yet, and hopefully never will. But you know, that we know they're just kicking the can down the road. But it requires the constant pressure. It's activism. It's positive activism. And as you know, Pippa observed, you know, she was pretty much on her own initially, and then over time, you know, other people picked up the gauntlet. And how many people here had ever heard of Pippa King? Okay, you know, that's great. That's about 30% of the room. That's fantastic, but that's still, you know, 60% that haven't. There's a lot of positive activism going on, you know, and it's beneath the radar. But obviously, the more people that get involved, then the more effective it will be. So, Pippa, you're doing an amazing job. So thanks very much, and keep it going. And I just want to make the observation. Is anybody here wearing anything from Marks and Spencer's? Oh, dear. Because every item of clothing that is sold in Marks and Spencer's has a passive RFID chip embedded within it for stock control purposes. Anybody who buys items of clothing, and actually from something I read a few weeks ago, quite possibly anything, but anybody who buys items of clothing from Marks and Spencer's with a credit card or debit card, the unique IP address that's associated with that passive RFID chip is then assigned to your credit or debit card. So, you know, the sort of technology that Pippa's been talking about here, just extrapolated a little further down the road, and you're talking about the technology that picks up the fact that, you know, here comes Ian Crane wearing a jacket that he bought in the Beverly branch of Marks and Spencer's on such and such a date. And, you know, you say, well, who the hell wants that information? The answer is no person wants that information. It's going into the database. And actually, I think there was probably something significant about the term. Was it Neo Watch? Neo Face. That's an interesting one, isn't it? Neo Face. We could probably have some discussion on that. But and anybody who has anybody use loyalty cards? Yeah, a few. Cut 'em up. Every time you use a loyalty card, you are feeding more of your personal data, more of your personal habits into the system. And, you know, like we said, it's not our generation that are so much the targets here as the next generation. And, you know, this really should be, and I'm sure it is, a prime motivation for a lot of what you're going to hear over the course of the weekend. It's not so much recognizing that we can bring about change that is going to necessarily impact on us, although we hope it will, but if we're not active, positively active, then the legacy that we are potentially condemning future generations to doesn't bear thinking about. So, that's the end of the morning. So this afternoon, my God, what an afternoon we've got for you. We're going to kick off, obviously, after lunch with David Noakes, and sharing his insights, his experience, his direct experience of what happens when you market a product that challenges the revenue streams of Big Pharma. Then we have Samantha Backman, and like I said, Samantha Backman carries a health warning. I was about to make a comment, but I'm going to rephrase from saying what I'm going to say there. And Samantha's presentation, extremely insightful, but not for the most sensitive souls. And then concluding the afternoon, of course, with Patrick Henningsen, who will be sharing his experience of being in the United States for the last 12 months. So